Hello, Christians, men, gunfighters, military, police, mercenaries, private security, competition shooters, somebody brand new to the sport, the discipline, the blessing and the talent that is shooting and gunfighting and defense, the way of the gun to protect and provide for oneself and those around you. Welcome or welcome back to Gunfighter Life. Please take a moment to hit the like, subscribe, and or comment on this podcast. Help support the community that you're now a part of. All right, guys, before we get into today's bio, today's episode is going to be on dry firing. Now, we've talked before about dry firing and why it's important, how it's important for a lot of reasons, to use those talents and skills and abilities and receive more abundance in them. It's important because Jesus says it's important. You'll find in the Gospel of Matthew, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away." You'll also find in the Gospel of Luke, also spoken by Jesus, "Let he who has no sword sell his cloak or sell his garment," depending on the translation, "and buy one. Let he who has no sword sell his garment and buy one." Also Psalm 144, "Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle." If you could not tell if this is your first time listening, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. If you don't like it, or if you're not a Christian, that's fine, but I am, and I don't apologize. It's first and foremost in my life and everything that I do, God is preeminent. And by God's grace, it will come out in everything that I do. This podcast is no different. This podcast is where we talk about gunfighting from the right perspective, a Judeo-Christian values and Judeo-Christian worldview through a biblical lens. As I said, today we're going to be talking about dry firing. The importance of dry firing, and more the focus today is going to be kind of how to dry fire, what to look for, and how to be better at dry firing, and therefore making you better at gunfighting in general. Going to roll into the bio. If you don't listen to the bio, go ahead and skip about 4 minutes and 15 seconds in, and that should be pretty close to the body. Who I am. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. I grew up in the Southeastern United States, what most would consider poor. Grew up hunting and fishing and shooting at a very early age. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did combat tours, plural, in Iraq. After that, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. After the Marine Corps time, I went to work for LAPD, where I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I've also been a private contractor for the federal government. I've also served the United States Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I have been a state rifle and pistol champion in a few different states, a few different times over. I started shooting competitions even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I am very blessed to have all those talents, and I am very blessed that God got me through everything that He's gotten me through alive and in one piece and made it back safely when a lot of other good men did not. Not because of anything that I am, but because of who God has made me and because of how much God has protected me and sheltered me. I have served as the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area where our primary job is to stock active shooters. I've hunted and fished all over this beautiful country, everything from whitetail on the East Coast and mule deer on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf and exotics, and buffalo. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professional firearms instructor, FBI certified, NRA certified, other 3-letter government agency certified, professional firearms instructor for a lot of years. And as I mentioned first, the most alpha thing about me is I am a follower of Jesus Christ, the ultimate alpha male. With that being said, we'll get into today's topic. All right, guys, let's talk about dry firing. I just got done dry firing. I tell my men, and I've told them for years, dry firing 15 minutes a day, every day except for Sabbath rest day, 15 minutes a day. Analogy I like to use is just like going to the gym. It's better to dry fire every day than it is, or let's say 6 days a week, excluding Sabbath day of rest. Better to dry fire a little bit every day than to go shooting twice a month and not dry fire, or once a month, or once a week even and not dry fire. How fit would you be if you went to the gym once every 2 weeks? Like you go to the range once every 2 weeks. You wouldn't be very fit. Better to dry fire a little bit every day. And I just picked 15 minutes. If you want to start out with 5, if you want to start out with 10, if you want to start out with 30, that's okay too. 15 is the minimum. One of the good men that I've had the pleasure of knowing in my life is a man named August. I had the pleasure of having him work for me by God's grace, and he really had a problem with people training to a time instead of to a standard. And I kind of agree with that. I just use 15 minutes to force myself and to give a tip to others to train for that long. That being said, I don't train a particular skill for a length of time. I always start out with the fundamentals, and if I'm not happy with that, I may train the whole 15 minutes on fundamentals. If I meet that standard that I set for myself in the fundamentals, I may move on to something, to the draw, to getting that gun on target fast, to my reloads, to, shooting at night, to flashlight techniques, to any number of things. But I just give myself that 15 minutes a day, and like I said, I could go over that, but I try to do at least that much. All right, guys, let's talk about safety. All weapons are always loaded. Keep your finger straight off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Don't point your weapon at anything you're not willing to destroy. I will say that even if you're dry firing, make sure you check your weapon and make sure it's unloaded. You still treat it as if it is loaded. Make sure you point it in a safe direction. If for whatever reason you think it's loaded, you come back for whatever reason, and you pick up that gun and it's not as unloaded as you think that it is. If you do have a negligent discharge, the round does not go somewhere that's going to injure somebody, including yourself. So safety first. All weapons are always loaded. And I guess another secondary one we'll throw in is know your target, consider its background. Bullets can go through a lot of stuff. All right, guys. Now, talking about dry fire, we can't do that really without talking about the fundamentals of marksmanship. Now, you may see these broken up in different ways. Some people may have 8, some people may have 5. But basically, it'd be stance, grip, sight alignment, sight picture, trigger control, breath control, and follow through. When I talk about the fundamentals, that's what I'm referring to. If you don't know those, you probably ought to take a basic course. Even if you don't have the money to take a formal course, at least take some kind of video course. Obviously, audio podcasts have their limits, but I would encourage you to, the majority of your practice should be the fundamentals. And I'm going to talk mostly about handgun dry fire, although all this applies to rifle, but handgun is the hardest gun to master. It is the hardest weapons platform to master. I'm talking about of the guns, rifle, pistol, shotgun. Handgun is the hardest to master. You can get away with, a few more things in a rifle than you can with a handgun. I've seen in my years of training and experience that somebody that is really good with a handgun will generally be good with a rifle. Somebody can be great with a rifle and really suck with a handgun. For those reasons, I encourage you to spend the majority of your time training with the fundamentals on a handgun if you can. If you live somewhere where handguns aren't really an option because, state laws have made it all but, impractical to even carry a handgun on you, or let's say you're 18 and you aren't allowed to have a handgun until you're 21, something like that, it may not apply, but in general, spend the bulk of your time training on a handgun. If you have great trigger control and great sight alignment, sight picture, follow through on a handgun, you generally will on a rifle as well. You still have to work on, a different little minutia, but if you're a great handgun shooter, you'll in general be a very good rifle shooter as well. So, when I'm talking about the fundamentals, okay, I've heard it broken down. One of the books that I bought in, the training library, so to speak, number 1 is the Bible, but this book is very good. It's called The Guerrilla Gunfighter, and I've got version 2, or the second volume, The Guerrilla Gunfighter by John Mosby. And I read something he put so succinct, and it's, it just struck a chord with me, because one of the things I say in a couple of different ways, especially in Simple Man Sermons, another podcast done here, is simple and powerful truth. Shooting is simple. You put the sights on target properly aligned and you hold them there until after the shot breaks. I don't know his exact quote, but it was something like that. To be a great shooter, you put the sights on the target and you hold them there until after the gun goes off. That's really all that it is. Very simple, but takes a lifetime of practice and dedication and mastery to do that. When you have an explosion going off in front of your face, it is not easy to hold the gun completely steady without influencing it. But that is the goal. Simple, but that doesn't make it easy. Analogy I often use is it's easy for me to tell you how to bench press 400 pounds. You get a bench press, you put 400 pounds worth of weight on it, you lay flat on the bench, you lift the weight off the rack, you lower it until it touches your chest, you bring it back up until you can extend your arms, and then you re-rack the weight. You just bench press 400 pounds. Very simple for me to tell you how to do. Not simple to actually do. So applying those fundamentals in dry fire. So get that weapon, make sure it's unloaded, put those sights on the target. Now the first thing you're going to have to do if you don't know is that you should keep both eyes open. Yes, both eyes open. And you should watch that front sight in relation to the rear sight in relation to the target. And you want that when that shot breaks, whatever it is, a Glock, a Beretta, a 1911, you should just hear a click and you should see no movement in this perceptible movement in the sights. Obviously, we're human. The earth is moving. We're breathing. Our heart's beating. But I'm talking about the goal is to see no perceptible movement in those sights on target. You should just hear a click, and those sights should not move at all. Not left, right, not up or down, not in relation to themselves, not in relation to the target. That is the goal. And I'm here to tell you, heard a little bit about my bio, and that's the goal for me. And the majority of the time, that is not accomplished in dry fire. I am very happy when I see a perfect, what I perceive, of course I am not perfect, but as far as I can visually perceive it, a perfect shot where nothing moves and I just hear the click and everything stays perfectly aligned on target. But that is the goal. I am a firm believer that that should be the majority of your practice. Just what I like when I go to live fire, unless I'm specifically going out to practice one specific skill, and that's all I have time for. The vast majority of the time, my practice is precision, the fundamentals, and pushing myself to be as precise and applying the fundamentals as well as possible. It's the same in dry fire. That is the goal. That should be the majority of your practice. Sometimes that may be the first shot. Sometimes you may take the whole 15 minutes and never see that, especially when you're just starting out. In order to do that, like I said, you got to keep both eyes open, and a lot of people have a tendency to blink when they squeeze that trigger. If you blink, you have no idea whether those sights moved or not because you didn't see them because your eyes were closed. So you have to work on keeping those eyes open. A little pro tip for that, it may sound silly, I did it a lot in competition shooting, but keep both eyes open, hold the gun in front of your face with your dominant hand or your weak hand, doesn't really matter. Watch that front sight and slap yourself in the face. Do it repetitively until you can keep those eyes open. And then see what that looks like, and then go to dry fire and make sure you're doing the same thing, that you're keeping those eyes open. If you're going to the range and live firing, or if you have a buddy when you're dry firing, you can have them watch you and watch your eyes to make sure that you're not blinking. But like I said, simple, but it takes a lifetime of dedication to master and to continue to remaster and to get better. But that's the goal. It may take you, 100 presses to get that perceivably perfect press. And then it may take you 75 and then 50, and then you may get it to a while, you may plateau, and it may be, 2 out of every 10. You may do that for years before you get to where most of them are great shots. But I am a firm believer that should be the bulk of your dry fire practice. When I talk about dry fire, that's what I'm talking about. And then from there, your second most fundamental. To apply those fundamentals, you have to get your gun into action. That famous quote, speed is fine, but accuracy is fine. Well, you got to be accurate first. There's a saying, you can't miss fast enough to win. And you'll see in the Rifleman's Creed, it's the hits that count. But also, if you get a great shot, but it takes you twice as long and there's somebody else shooting at you, you need to be able to get that gun into action fast. So your next thing you should work on is getting that gun into action fast, whether that's to draw with a pistol, getting it from whatever kind of holster you normally run, getting that gun into action quickly. That should be the next thing that you practice once you're comfortable with your fundamentals. And, a great shooter can shoot really accurately, and a great shooter can shoot fast. And I believe a master knows when to balance those two and can balance those two seamlessly. That's a master of that craft. So work on getting that gun into action quickly. And one thing to do that, a lot of people, especially newer shooters, think that to shoot really fast, they have to move really fast. But first, as we've talked about previously, try and iron out all that superfluous movement. Try and do as little movement as it takes to get that gun from in the holster to that front sight being on target and properly aligned and giving it a slow, steady press on that trigger. Ironing out all that extra movement. Work on that. and only then work on the speed and then, pressing the gas. But if you're doing a bunch of extra movement really, really fast, you're just inefficient. One of the keys to shooting accurately is doing consistency, the same thing over and over again. One of the keys to speed is being concise and not doing anything superfluous. So work on that. Strive for that mastery. And then once those two things are together, then you can balance. Get your little tiny precise target, whatever distance that you shoot at for that precision, and then get a slightly bigger target and work on getting that gun on that target faster. And then maybe get some different targets at different distances and see how fast you can get that sight on target and keep it there through the firing cycle. Assuming your gun sighted in and it's not broken, you don't need to actually fire a round to do any of this. You don't actually need to go to the range. You should go to the range periodically to test out your equipment and to make sure these skills are actually working and there's nothing that's showing up in live fire and not in dry fire. But reason with me this, man. Reason with me as professional gunfighters, as whatever you are. If that gun is sighted in, assuming that gun is shooting point of aim, point of impact, if that front sight, if that reticle, if that red dot, whatever it is, if you put that sighting system there and hold it there through the firing cycle, then that's the only place that shot can go is where that front sight is. You might have a general idea if you can call your shot, like you may have seen a little circular movement in your front sight, but as long as that front sight did not move out of the acceptable target zone, you know with all but 100% certainty, because a gun could blow up, a gun could malfunction, something like that. But barring anything ridiculously crazy, if your front sight stayed in that acceptable target zone in the firing cycle, your front, that shot or that dry fire, if it was a real shot, would have hit that target. There's no other place for that round to go. Where if that front sight stayed in that target the entire press of the trigger, then that's where that shot will go. Likewise, the reticle. You will get better and better at calling your shots. But if your reticle stayed, let's say you're dry firing at a deer, silhouette on your wall, getting ready for hunting season, if that reticle stayed in the acceptable kill zone of that deer the entire time you were dry firing through that trigger press, then that is a good shot on that deer. If it moved outside of that into the guts or down into the leg or up into somewhere else, then that's not a for sure good acceptable shot on that animal, and it wouldn't be in real life either. You can do all these skills dry fire. The only one you really can't do is recoil control, obviously, because you're not going to have recoil. But recoil control, you got to do that live fire. But pretty much every other skill, if you're practicing the draw, you can practice that dry fire. If you're practicing your fundamentals, you honestly usually will do better at practicing the fundamentals dry fire than live fire. So when I talk about dry fire and its importance, that's really what I'm talking about. That's the essence of it. So I would encourage you to get out there. Now that, like I said in previous podcasts, I kind of get a skewed view from my life and my life experiences, as we all do. But like when I tell somebody to work out, I just assume they know what that means. Because I've been doing it for decades. When I say to dry fire, I just assume because I've been doing it for decades that people know what I mean when I say dry fire. But if you don't, or if you do, hopefully this is a refresher and a reminder of how important that it is. Get that repetitive, muscle movement. Get, as the younger millennials like to say, get those reps in. Get those gains, whatever, whether it applies to the gym or applies to dry fire. Like I said, you're not going to become a great shooter by going to the range once a month and shooting hundreds of rounds. Far better to dry fire a little bit every day, except for Sabbath, except for your rest day. Dry fire a little bit every day. Little quick story to illustrate this. Ironically, I was in the Army and I was sent to some training where I could not have a gun. I could not practice. I could not live fire really with the regiment. I couldn't bring guns with me. I was big into competition shooting at the time. And I went to Walmart and bought some airsoft guns and or a BB gun. I'm not really sure. I don't remember which ones. But they had, they were handguns similar to what I would be competing with. And I dry fired during the course of that school that I was at for weeks. And as soon as I was done, I went and I shot a competition, and I shot remarkably well. In fact, I was a regional. I shot that and placed as the regional rifle champion for the West Coast. And I believe that I had landed it, and that was the first shot that I had fired live fire was in that competition after weeks and weeks of just dry firing. It does work. I knew that it worked before that, but that was just a good illustration that dry firing is important. If you told me right now I had a big competition, or even worse, if I had a gunfight coming up that I could not avoid that gunfight in my life, if I could avoid it, I would, unless it was to save the life of somebody else. But let's say that I knew that was coming up, and I didn't know exactly when, and I could add the choice between dry fire only or live fire only, I would pick dry fire. Dry fire is more important than live fire. I really believe that. And I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to get out there and use the talents and skills and abilities you've been given to multiply them. The blessings that you have are a gift from God. They're not meant to be hoarded, they're not meant to be squandered, they're not meant to be neglected. They're meant to be used and multiplied by God's grace. So get out there and do that. All right, gunfighters. I'm going to try something a little bit different maybe. If you don't know, there's some other podcasts. If you like this one, you may also like the Alpha Male podcast. It's about what it sounds like. If you like the important stuff, you may like Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. You can check them out likely on whatever platform you're listening to this on. If you want to help support this community that you're now a part of, please consider hitting that like, subscribe, and comment button. If you want to get some other content, if you're a more visual person, go to Patreon and just type in Gunfighter Life or type in Good Shepherd Training. You can also go to goodshepherdtraining.com. It is kind of the umbrella that houses all these things. You can also check out more visual stuff on Good Shepherd Training on Instagram. You're certainly welcome on any of those. Something new I want to try and do is, I know a lot of people are new to this podcast and new listeners from the last couple of years, and I'm very thankful for that, but maybe not everybody goes back and listens to older episodes, so you might get a little bit of double dose and see if you like it. I'm going to put out one new episode this week and try and put out one older episode later in a few days, just to see if that catches on and if it bears fruit and if you guys like it. And also a little thank you for getting to the end of the podcast and listening. I'm going to throw out a little tack tip. I'm going to try and do this periodically, throw out a tack tip at the end of the podcast, just as a little thank you to the community. So a tactical tip of the day is have a Sharpie on you, whether you're dry firing or live firing. So one of the things you can do in dry fire or live fire, when you get everything, when you get that great shot, that perceivably perfect shot that I was talking about, take that Sharpie and mark how that gun sits in your hand. Mark, a section of that gun with the Sharpie, and then mark on your hand with the Sharpie so you can do the same thing every time. Likewise with your trigger finger, mark on both sides of your trigger finger where that trigger is on your finger, that front sight did not move at all left or right. Mark your hands where they are in relation to each other, so your support hand and then where it is on your firing hand, where that relationship is, so you can repeat that. That Sharpie ought to last a day or two, and if you're dry firing every day, you can renew that every day. So that's a little thing like we talked about. Consistency is one of the keys to being an accurate shooter. So that Sharpie, having that on you, it also comes in handy for a lot of other reasons when you're out at the range, marking your target, when you're trying to sight in a rifle. For a myriad of things, I don't think you'll ever regret having a Sharpie on you. So when you're dry firing and live firing, have that Sharpie handy. So there's my tack tip for the day, guys. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.